Have you ever felt like you're standing at a quiet crossroads, holding on to a relationship that feels familiar, even comforting, yet somewhere deep inside, you know it's costing you something, not in dramatic ways, not with explosions or betrayal, but in small, invisible pieces of yourself that seem to disappear every time you silence your truth just to keep the peace? It's a strange kind of pain, the kind that comes from loving someone and slowly realizing that staying loyal might mean being disloyal to yourself. The Stoics understood this tension. They believed that a life of virtue requires courage, and sometimes courage doesn't look like fighting harder. It looks like walking away with dignity. Stoicism isn't about cold detachment. It's about alignment, about choosing relationships that strengthen your character rather than weaken your spirit. If you're here, it's probably because something inside you is questioning what you've been tolerating. Stay with me, reflect deeply, and if you value conversations rooted in truth, courage, and the pursuit of inner strength, consider subscribing as a commitment to your own growth. Growth is uncomfortable, but it should never feel forbidden. When you begin to change, when your habits improve, your thinking deepens, your boundaries strengthen, there is a natural friction that comes with it. But friction is different from resistance. Friction sharpens you. Resistance tries to shrink you. Sometimes the resistance comes from people who claim they love you. It sounds harmless at first. A joke about your ambition. A comment about how you are too serious now. A reminder of who you used to be, as if your past self is the only acceptable version of you. Slowly you begin to feel tension every time you step forward. You hesitate before sharing your goals. You soften your standards so you do not make anyone uncomfortable. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you." That line carries weight. It is not about cutting people off at the first disagreement. It is about noticing who celebrates your growth and who quietly resents it. If someone becomes distant when you improve, if your discipline irritates them, if your new boundaries feel like an attack to them, then the issue is not your growth, it is their comfort. Real growth is supposed to stretch you, not isolate you. When you evolve, healthy relationships adjust with you. They may ask questions, they may need time, but they do not try to anchor you to a smaller version of yourself. If every step forward feels like you are dragging someone behind you, that weight will eventually slow you down. You will begin to choose comfort over expansion just to keep the peace, and that is where something dangerous begins. You start shrinking to fit into old expectations. You speak less about your plans. You laugh off your own ambitions. You convince yourself that loyalty means staying the same. But growth that feels forbidden is not loyalty. It is quiet self-betrayal. The tension you feel in these moments is not random. It is information. When the space around you tightens as you try to rise, pay attention. That tightening is not just emotional. It becomes physical. Your energy drops after certain conversations. You feel drained instead of inspired. You question whether your standards are too much. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Notice the simplicity in that statement. It does not say seek permission. It does not say wait until others approve. It says be it. If someone close to you makes you feel guilty for becoming more disciplined, more thoughtful, more focused, then the conflict is not about love. It is about alignment. Sometimes the resistance is subtle. It is not open criticism. It is indifference, a lack of encouragement, a shift in tone when you talk about your goals. You sense it, you feel it, and instead of addressing it, you may begin to doubt yourself. That doubt is powerful. If you do not consciously recognize how certain relationships affect your growth, you will start believing your stagnation is destiny. You will say, maybe I am just not meant for more. But often what you call fate is simply the influence of the people closest to you. Growth should feel supported, even when it is uncomfortable. It should be met with curiosity, not competition. The right people do not feel threatened by your evolution. They are inspired by it. They may challenge you, but their challenge pushes you forward, not backward. When someone truly cares about your well-being, they want to see you become stronger, wiser, and more disciplined. They do not remind you of your old mistakes to keep you small. They do not mock your progress to protect their ego. They adapt, they grow alongside you, and if they cannot grow with you, they at least respect your direction. There is also a deeper layer to this. Growth changes dynamics. When you set boundaries, some people lose control over you. When you improve your habits, some people lose access to the old version of you that was easier to influence. That shift can create tension. But tension does not mean you are wrong. Freedom begins when you decide that your standards are not negotiable. If maintaining a relationship requires you to lower those standards, then you are not free within it. You are managed by it. This does not mean you become cold or harsh. Stoicism is not about cutting people off without thought. It is about clarity. It is about seeing relationships for what they are, not what you wish they would be. Sometimes you will find that the discomfort is temporary. Conversations help. Honest communication clears misunderstandings. But sometimes, even after clarity, the resistance remains. That is when you must decide whether you are willing to slow your growth to preserve familiarity. Growth supported by others feels expansive. Growth resisted by others feels heavy, and heaviness accumulates. Over time, that weight turns into resentment. You begin to notice how often you edit yourself, how often you downplay your wins, how often you shrink your voice, and slowly you realize the cost. It is not just about goals, it is about identity. Every time you silence your ambition to keep someone comfortable, you teach yourself that comfort matters more than purpose. The Stoics believed that virtue is the highest good. Virtue requires courage. Courage is not only about facing external battles, it is about facing the quiet realization that some relationships no longer align with who you are becoming. That realization does not demand anger, it demands honesty. You do not need to accuse anyone, you only need to acknowledge the pattern. If your growth consistently creates distance instead of connection, then the path forward may require space. In the end, the signal is simple. When you imagine your future self, stronger, more disciplined, more aligned, ask whether this relationship supports that vision or resists it. You already know the answer. It shows up in your energy, in your confidence, in the way you speak about your dreams. Growth should stretch you, not suffocate you. And when the space around you shrinks every time you try to expand, that tension is not random. It is clarity asking to be acknowledged. Then there is the emotional climate, not the big arguments, not the obvious betrayals, the atmosphere. You walk into a conversation already preparing yourself. You rehearse your words in your head before speaking. You measure your tone. You predict their reaction. You soften your truth so it does not trigger something. Over time, you become less present and more strategic. You are not connecting. You are managing. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. A relationship should not feel like walking into unstable weather every day. It should not require constant emotional calculation. When your nervous system is always alert around someone, that is not intimacy. That is adaptation. You start to notice small signs. Your shoulders tighten before meeting them. Your mood changes after speaking with them. You replay conversations later, wondering if you said something wrong. You begin to question your own reactions. Were you too sensitive? Too quiet? Too honest? That confusion grows quietly, and instead of feeling understood, you feel examined. Instead of feeling supported, you feel evaluated. That slow erosion of safety does not happen overnight. It builds, layer by layer, word by word, until what once felt natural now feels tense. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That line is often misunderstood. Strength does not mean tolerating chaos. It means recognizing what is within your control and acting accordingly. You cannot control someone else's moods, reactions, or emotional patterns, but you can control whether you repeatedly place yourself in an environment that unsettles you. If every interaction leaves you drained, confused, or questioning your own stability, something is not aligned. Strength is not enduring emotional turbulence forever. Strength is noticing when your peace is consistently disturbed and taking that disturbance seriously. Emotional safety is rarely discussed, but it is foundational. Without it, even love feels unstable. You should not have to earn calmness. You should not have to prove that your feelings are valid. In a healthy connection, disagreements may happen, but they do not feel threatening. You do not fear being dismissed. You do not fear retaliation for honesty. There is room to speak, room to disagree, room to exist fully. When that space shrinks, you begin shrinking with it. You share less. You explain less. You protect yourself more. And slowly, connection turns into caution. Carl Jung observed, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." Though he spoke about family, the principle reaches further. Sometimes in relationships, people project their unresolved emotions onto you, their fears, their insecurities, their frustrations. You become the container for what they have not faced. You find yourself carrying tension that does not belong to you. Over time, that emotional transfer becomes heavy. You are not only managing your own growth, but also someone else's unprocessed storms. If you are constantly absorbing negativity without balance, you are not in a partnership. You are in emotional labor. Peace is not a luxury reserved for rare moments. It is a baseline requirement for well-being. When someone repeatedly disrupts your inner balance, that disturbance becomes information. It tells you something about compatibility, about emotional maturity, about alignment. You do not need dramatic evidence to justify discomfort. Quiet exhaustion is enough. Repeated confusion is enough. That uneasy feeling in your chest before a conversation is enough. The Stoics valued tranquility not because life is easy, but because inner stability allows you to respond wisely. Without it, you react, you defend, you overthink. Sometimes people normalize chaos. They call it passion, they call it intensity. But intensity without stability is draining. You cannot build something solid on emotional unpredictability. If calm only comes during silence and tension returns the moment honesty appears, then something deeper is misaligned. You may tell yourself that everyone has flaws, and that is true. But flaws are different from patterns. Patterns repeat. Patterns shape your experience, and patterns that consistently undermine your emotional safety deserve attention. Seneca wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Kindness is not only grand gestures, it is emotional steadiness. It is listening without attacking. It is responding without escalating. If kindness feels rare in a relationship, replaced by defensiveness or emotional volatility, that imbalance will slowly wear you down. You will start guarding your words. You will avoid certain topics. You will choose silence over expression. And in doing so, you will distance yourself from your own truth. Notice the difference between feeling challenged and feeling threatened. A healthy relationship can challenge your thinking, your habits, even your perspective, but it does not threaten your sense of safety. You are not afraid to be honest. You are not afraid to disagree. When that fear creeps in, even subtly, it changes how you show up. You become smaller, more cautious, less authentic, and the cost is not only peace, it is identity. The central theme remains simple but heavy. Growth and peace must coexist. If growth feels resisted and peace feels disturbed, the relationship requires reflection. You do not need to label anyone as bad. You only need to observe the emotional climate honestly. If your calm disappears in someone's presence, that disappearance matters. If you feel alert instead of at ease, That alertness is speaking. At some point, you must ask yourself not whether you can endure it, but whether you should. Endurance without alignment becomes self-neglect, and self-neglect, repeated long enough, turns into quiet resentment. The Stoic path is not about cold detachment. It is about clarity. It is about recognizing where your peace is respected and where it is disrupted. When you begin to honor that clarity, you move closer to relationships that feel steady, not strategic. And in that steadiness, you rediscover what true connection was always meant to feel like. Sometimes the problem is not loud. It is not dramatic arguments or obvious betrayal. It is something quieter, slower, harder to name. It begins with small suggestions, harmless at first. A comment about how you should dress, a gentle correction about how you should speak, advice about who you should spend time with. Over time, those suggestions start to feel heavier. They are repeated more often. They carry a tone of expectation. And before you fully notice it, opinions have turned into quiet rules. You find yourself adjusting without being asked directly. You edit your humor. You filter your thoughts. You change small parts of your personality to avoid friction. The shift feels practical, even mature. But something inside you knows it is not alignment. It is adaptation. Control rarely arrives announcing itself. It disguises itself as care. It hides behind phrases like, "I just want what's best for you." It comes wrapped in concern, in advice, in subtle disapproval. You begin to measure your words more carefully around this person than anyone else. You feel a quiet relief when they approve of your decisions. You feel tension when they do not. That tension becomes a compass, guiding your choices. And slowly, your internal compass fades. You begin looking outward for permission. The dynamic changes. You are no longer acting from your own values. You are reacting to someone else's expectations. Epictetus warned, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom does not mean rebellion. It does not mean defiance for the sake of pride. It means ownership. Ownership of your decisions. Ownership of your time. Ownership of your identity. If a relationship requires you to surrender that ownership just to keep it intact, then what remains of you inside it? A connection built on quiet submission is not harmony. It is quiet captivity. And captivity does not always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like approval that you are afraid to lose. You may tell yourself that compromise is part of love, and that is true. Healthy relationships require flexibility. They require understanding. But compromise is mutual. Control is not. Compromise feels like balance. Control feels like imbalance. You notice it when your choices are questioned more than respected, when your independence is framed as distance, when your boundaries are treated as rejection. You start to shrink your world to make someone else more comfortable. You think you are preserving peace. In reality, you are trading pieces of yourself. This erosion is subtle. That is why it is dangerous. There is no single moment where you declare that you are no longer free. It happens through repetition, through small concessions, through silence when you want to speak, through agreement when you want to disagree. Over time, your identity feels less clear. You hesitate before making decisions alone. You seek validation before trusting your own judgment. That hesitation becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes normal. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Obstacles can strengthen you when you face them directly, but when the obstacle is disguised as affection, you may not confront it. You adapt instead. You try to be easier, more agreeable, less intense, and in doing so, you avoid the discomfort of conflict, but you create a deeper discomfort within yourself. Growth requires friction, but growth does not require surrendering your voice. Control also affects how you see yourself. When someone consistently questions your choices, you begin to question them too. When they express doubt about your goals, you may start doubting your ambition. Carl Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That process requires space. It requires freedom to explore your ideas without constant correction. If a relationship restricts that space, your development slows. You remain in a version of yourself that fits within someone else's expectations rather than your own potential. Freedom inside a relationship is not chaos. It is mutual respect. It is knowing that you can think differently without being punished emotionally. It is knowing that your decisions are your own, even if they are debated. If you do not feel like the author of your own life when you are around someone, then who is writing your story? That question is not meant to create suspicion. It is meant to create awareness. Awareness of how much influence you have surrendered and whether that surrender was conscious. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." Bravery is not only about facing external threats. It is about confronting internal discomfort. It is about admitting when something feels wrong, even if there is no clear villain. Recognizing control within a relationship can be painful because it challenges the image you have built. It forces you to examine patterns you may have tolerated for years. But bravery begins with clarity, and clarity begins with observation. As this pattern continues, you may notice something else. You stop initiating ideas that might be disapproved of. You avoid topics that lead to tension. You design your behavior around predicted reactions. That is not partnership, that is management. And management slowly replaces authenticity. The more you manage yourself, the less you express yourself. The less you express yourself, the further you drift from your own truth. The central theme remains steady. Growth and dignity must coexist. If your autonomy consistently shrinks within a relationship, that shrinkage is not trivial. It is a sign, not of conflict, but of imbalance. You do not need to react with anger. You only need to observe honestly. Are your choices respected? Are your boundaries honored? Are you encouraged to think independently or subtly steered toward conformity? Freedom does not demand isolation. It demands alignment. When you feel free to be yourself, you grow. When you feel managed, you contract. That contraction may be quiet, but its impact is real. Over time, you will either reclaim your voice or lose confidence in it. The decision begins with awareness, and awareness begins by asking whether the relationship strengthens your independence or quietly replaces it. Respect is foundational. Without it, everything else eventually weakens. Not all disrespect comes in the form of insults or harsh words. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in tone, in dismissive looks, in the way someone interrupts you as if your thoughts are less important. It shows up when your feelings are brushed aside, when your concerns are labeled as overreactions, when your experiences are minimized instead of understood. At first, you may not even notice it. You may tell yourself that everyone has bad days, that patience is a virtue, that understanding is the mature response. And yes, patience matters. Compassion matters. But there is a thin line between compassion and self-erasure, and crossing that line repeatedly has consequences. A relationship without mutual respect slowly shifts in structure. It stops feeling like a partnership and starts feeling like a hierarchy. One voice carries more weight. One perspective dominates. Decisions revolve around one person's comfort. You begin adjusting your reactions, softening your words, choosing silence over clarity because it feels easier than conflict. You think you are being strong by staying calm. You think you are being wise by not escalating tension. But over time, you begin to notice that your calmness is not bringing balance. It is only creating space for more imbalance. Dignity is subtle. It is not loud or dramatic. It is the quiet sense that you are valued, heard, and taken seriously. When dignity is present, you feel steady even during disagreements. When dignity is absent, even small conversations leave you unsettled. You replay moments in your head, wondering why your voice felt so small, why your opinion felt optional, why your emotions felt inconvenient. These small moments accumulate. They do not explode, they settle. And what settles begins to shape how you see yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it." This insight invites reflection, not self-blame. It does not mean you are responsible for someone else's disrespect. It means you are responsible for how long you tolerate it. When you repeatedly allow your dignity to be undermined, your judgment begins to shift. You start normalizing what once felt unacceptable. You start lowering the standard of how you expect to be treated. That shift does not happen overnight. It is gradual, almost invisible, and that is why it is dangerous. Respect also shows itself in curiosity, in someone wanting to understand your inner world, your fears, your hopes, your reasoning. When curiosity fades, conversations become one-sided. You speak, but no one leans in. You explain, but no one truly listens. The absence of curiosity is not always loud, but it is powerful. It sends a message that your inner life is not worthy of exploration. Over time, you may begin to hide parts of yourself simply because sharing them feels pointless. Carl Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power." That statement captures something essential. When respect exists, there is no need to dominate. There is no urge to control or belittle. There is space for difference without the desire to win. When will to power replaces mutual regard, the relationship subtly shifts into competition. Who is right? Who has the final word? Who sets the tone? And in that silent competition, warmth begins to fade. You may try to justify staying. You may say that no relationship is perfect, and that is true. But imperfection is different from erosion. Healthy relationships can survive mistakes, misunderstandings, even conflict. What they cannot survive is sustained disrespect. When you have clearly expressed how certain behavior affects you and nothing changes, the message becomes clearer. Your discomfort is acknowledged but not valued. Your boundaries are heard but not honored. And eventually, you begin to question whether your standards are too high. Seneca wrote, "He who respects himself is safe from others." Self-respect creates a boundary that protects you. It shapes what you accept and what you reject. But self-respect weakens when it is not practiced. Each time you ignore a dismissive comment, each time you overlook a sarcastic remark that cuts deeper than it seems, each time you silence yourself to avoid being interrupted. These small choices teach you something about your own worth. And if you repeatedly teach yourself that your voice is optional, your confidence begins to reflect that lesson. There is also a quiet emotional cost. When respect fades, affection feels conditional. You may feel appreciated when you agree, when you comply, when you support. But when you challenge or assert yourself, the tone shifts. Approval becomes scarce. That pattern can train you to seek harmony at the expense of honesty. You may begin shaping your personality around what receives praise rather than what feels authentic. Slowly, your self-worth becomes tied to someone else's validation. The central theme returns here, steady and clear. Growth and dignity must coexist. If your self-worth is eroding within a relationship, that erosion matters. It does not require dramatic confrontation to be real. It does not require public humiliation to be serious. It only requires repetition, repeated dismissal, repeated minimization, repeated disregard. And with repetition comes internal change. You start believing you deserve less. Aristotle observed, "Dignity consists not in possessing honors, but in deserving them." Dignity is not about external praise. It is about knowing your inherent value. When you remain in a situation that consistently undermines that value, you send yourself a message. That message shapes your future relationships, your ambitions, your standards. Staying communicates something, even if you never speak it aloud. Sometimes the clearest sign that it is time to step back is not explosive conflict. It is the quiet realization that you no longer feel like yourself, that you hesitate before speaking, that you doubt your instincts, that your confidence feels thinner than it once did. Respect is not optional, it is structural. Without it, everything else slowly collapses. And if the foundation beneath you is cracking, ignoring it will not strengthen the building. It will only delay the inevitable recognition that your dignity deserves protection. There is another trap that feels softer, almost romantic, but it can be just as destructive. The illusion trap. You are not always in love with who the person actually is. You are attached to who you believe they could become. You hold on to the rare good days, the unexpected kindness, the moments when everything feels easy and connected. You replay those memories like proof. You use them as evidence that the future will be better, even when the present keeps repeating the same pattern. You build a story in your mind that explains away the inconsistency. You say they are stressed. You say they will change. You say they just need time. And slowly, your attachment shifts from reality to potential. The mind is powerful. It can turn a few bright moments into a promise of transformation. It can magnify small gestures into signs of deep commitment. You focus on who they might become if circumstances were different, if they healed, if they matured, if they realized what they have. You tell yourself that love means believing in someone's potential, but potential is not the same as pattern. Patterns show you who someone is today. Potential shows you who they might be someday, and when you build your life on someday, you live in suspension. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Illusions often live in the unconscious. You may not even realize how much you are projecting onto the relationship. You see what you want to see. You interpret events through hope. You explain away behavior that makes you uncomfortable. Over time, the illusion becomes stronger than the evidence, and when the same disappointment repeats, you call it bad luck. You call it timing. You call it fate. But sometimes, what you call fate is simply avoidance. Reality can hurt. It can force you to admit that the person you care about is not aligned with you, that the future you imagined is not supported by the present you are living. Facing that truth requires courage. It means letting go of a dream, not just a person. And dreams can be harder to release because they feel tied to your identity. You imagined growing together. You imagined change. You imagined stability. Letting go of that imagined future feels like losing something real, even if it never truly existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." That does not mean pretending everything is positive. It means aligning your thoughts with truth. When your thoughts are built on illusion, your happiness becomes fragile. It depends on someone becoming different. It depends on circumstances shifting. It depends on waiting. But when your thoughts are grounded in reality, even painful reality, your decisions become clearer. You stop negotiating with hope and start responding to what is actually in front of you. Illusions drain slowly. They do not create immediate crisis. They create gradual exhaustion. You stay invested in a version of the relationship that appears occasionally but never consistently. You overlook the gaps because you are focused on the peaks. You accept less than you deserve because you are convinced that more is coming. That waiting period stretches. Weeks turn into months. Months turn into years. And during that time, you are not building something solid. You are waiting for something imagined. There is also a subtle fear beneath illusion. If you let go of the fantasy, you must face uncertainty. You must accept that the relationship may never become what you hoped. You must admit that your vision was not shared. That admission can feel like failure, but it is not failure. It is clarity. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Notice how often you suffer because of what you expect to happen rather than what is actually happening. You suffer because you believe change is coming, because you believe that one more effort will shift everything, because you believe that if you are patient enough, the illusion will become real. Hope is not the enemy. Hope can inspire growth, but hope without evidence becomes denial. There is a difference between believing in someone's capacity to grow and ignoring their consistent behavior. Growth requires willingness from both sides. It requires effort, not just promises. If the effort is missing, then the potential remains distant. And if you are the only one investing in that potential, the imbalance will eventually show. The central theme returns here quietly. Growth and peace require alignment with truth. If you are in love with a fantasy rather than the person in front of you, your foundation is unstable. You cannot build a future on what might be. You can only build on what is. That realization does not have to come with bitterness. It can come with acceptance. Acceptance that this person may be exactly who they are showing themselves to be. There comes a moment when the question becomes unavoidable. Are you in love with truth, or are you negotiating with hope? That question does not demand an immediate answer. It invites reflection. It invites honesty. It asks you to examine whether your attachment is based on reality or imagination, and once you see the difference clearly, your choices begin to shift. Plato observed, "Reality is created by the mind. We can change our reality by changing our mind. Changing your mind does not mean distorting facts. It means choosing to see them clearly. When you remove the illusion, the relationship may look different. It may feel less magical, but it will feel more honest. And honesty, even when painful, creates space for genuine growth. Illusions promise comfort. Reality offers clarity. Comfort can feel warm in the short term, but clarity builds strength in the long term. If you continue to ignore what is in front of you because the fantasy feels safer, you will slowly disconnect from your own judgment. But if you allow yourself to see clearly, even when it hurts, you reclaim your power. And reclaiming that power brings you closer to relationships rooted in truth rather than possibility. Values are not decorations. They are not ideas you post about or words you repeat when it sounds good. They are anchors. They hold you steady when emotions rise and pressure builds. They guide your decisions when no one is watching. And when those anchors begin to shift, you feel it immediately, even if you try to ignore it. It may start small. You laugh at something that unsettles you. You stay quiet when a comment crosses a line. You participate in behavior that does not sit right with you, just to avoid conflict. You tell yourself it is not a big deal. But inside, something fractures. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. There is clarity in that simplicity. It leaves little room for negotiation, yet relationships can blur that clarity. When emotions are involved, when history is involved, you begin to justify actions that you would never accept from yourself alone. You may convince yourself that compromise is necessary, and compromise is part of any healthy bond. But there is a difference between adjusting preferences and abandoning principles. One is flexibility, the other is self-betrayal. Integrity is quiet. It does not announce itself loudly. It is the calm feeling that your actions align with your beliefs. When that alignment breaks, you feel discomfort. That discomfort is not random guilt. It is a signal. The more often you override it, the weaker it becomes. Over time, you stop noticing the internal resistance. You begin to normalize behavior that once disturbed you. And slowly, your standards shift without your permission. Sometimes the pressure is subtle. It may not be direct instructions. It may be jokes that push boundaries, expectations that assume you will comply, disapproval when you refuse. You begin weighing your values against the cost of tension. You choose silence to maintain peace. You soften your stance to preserve harmony. And with each small concession, you teach yourself something about your worth. You teach yourself that keeping the relationship matters more than staying true to yourself. Seneca wrote, "A man without a purpose is like a ship without a rudder." Values are your rudder. Without them, you drift toward whatever current is strongest. When a relationship pressures you to ignore your principles, it does not just challenge your comfort, it challenges your direction. You may start feeling uncertain about who you are. Decisions that once felt clear become complicated. You hesitate before speaking. You question your own standards. That hesitation is the result of misalignment. There is also a deeper cost. When you repeatedly act against your beliefs, your self-respect weakens. Self-respect is built on consistency, on knowing that your actions reflect your values. If you compromise that consistency for long enough, confidence fades. You may still appear strong outwardly, but internally you know you are not fully standing by what you believe. That gap between belief and behavior creates tension, and tension that remains unresolved turns into quiet resentment. Carl Jung observed, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Accepting yourself means embracing your values, even when they create discomfort. It means acknowledging that your moral compass is not negotiable simply because someone else disagrees. When you begin shaping your ethics around someone else's expectations, you lose that acceptance. You start becoming a version of yourself that feels easier for others but less authentic for you. This does not mean you become rigid or judgmental. It does not mean you refuse growth. Growth often refines values, but refinement is different from erosion. Growth strengthens your understanding of what matters. Erosion weakens it. If a relationship consistently pulls you away from what you know is right, then the conflict is not about preference. It is about identity. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." Sometimes we believe we are strong in our values until they are tested. A relationship can reveal how firmly we hold our principles. When you find yourself repeatedly excusing behavior that contradicts your beliefs, that test is happening in real time. You are being asked, silently, to choose between belonging and integrity. The choice may not be dramatic. It may not even feel like a choice at first. But the accumulation of small compromises forms a pattern. That pattern shapes how you see yourself. When you look in the mirror and remember moments where you stayed silent instead of speaking truth, you feel a subtle disappointment, not because you are perfect, but because you know you are capable of more courage. That disappointment can either push you toward clarity or pull you deeper into denial. The longer you ignore it, the harder it becomes to reconnect with your own standards. The central theme remains steady. Growth, peace, and dignity must align with your values. If maintaining a relationship requires you to betray your moral compass, then it is not asking for compromise. It is asking for self-abandonment. And self-abandonment does not stay contained within one connection. It spreads. It influences how you approach work, friendships, and future partnerships. Aristotle once wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." If you repeatedly silence your convictions to maintain comfort, you gradually become someone who tolerates misalignment. But if you choose consistency, even when it is uncomfortable, you strengthen your identity. That strength may create tension in the short term. It may even create distance, but it also creates clarity. Values are anchors. When they hold, you remain steady even in emotional storms. When they loosen, you drift. The decision to protect your integrity does not require anger or dramatic exits. It requires honesty. Honesty about what you believe, honesty about what you are willing to accept, and honesty about whether the relationship supports or undermines the person you are striving to become. Balance matters more than most people admit. It is easy to overlook when emotions are strong and history runs deep. You tell yourself that giving more is simply part of love, that adjusting more is maturity, that apologizing first shows wisdom. But when you are always the one initiating, always the one fixing, always the one bending, something inside you starts to feel tired. You may not complain. You may even take pride in being the stable one, yet over time that pride turns into quiet exhaustion, because what you are calling generosity may actually be imbalance. Reciprocity is not about counting favors or measuring every action. It is about energy. It is about whether both people are leaning in or whether one is carrying the weight. When you are the only one reaching out after conflict, the only one planning, the only one checking in, you are not in partnership. You are in pursuit. And pursuit cannot sustain intimacy for long. The human spirit longs to feel chosen, not chased. When effort is one-sided, connection becomes strained. You may try harder, you may give more, but giving more does not create balance if the other side remains still. Seneca wrote, "He who receives a benefit with gratitude repays the first installment." Gratitude is not passive, it is expressed through action, through appreciation, through effort. When someone values what you bring into their life, they show it, not only in words, but in consistency. If appreciation is rare and effort is uneven, the imbalance becomes visible. You start noticing how often you excuse behavior that leaves you depleted. You tell yourself they are busy, that they are stressed, that they will improve, but patterns matter more than promises. The imbalance often reveals itself during conflict. You apologize even when you are unsure you were wrong. You take responsibility to restore calm. Meanwhile, accountability on the other side feels distant. Conversations about fairness turn into guilt. You are told that you are asking for too much, that you are overthinking, that love should not feel like negotiation, and so you silence your concerns to preserve harmony. But harmony built on suppression does not last. It simply delays resentment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee." A relationship is like a hive. It functions when both contribute. If one bee carries the work while the other benefits without effort, the structure weakens. Balance protects both sides. It prevents burnout. It prevents entitlement. When reciprocity disappears, one person grows tired while the other grows comfortable. And comfort without contribution breeds distance. You may notice subtle signs. You hesitate before sharing your needs because you feel they are burdensome. You downplay your own exhaustion. You convince yourself that loving someone means enduring more. But love is not measured by how much you tolerate. It is reflected in how equally you are valued. When your needs feel secondary and your presence feels assumed rather than appreciated, the imbalance deepens. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." In a one-sided dynamic, loneliness often grows quietly. You are physically present, yet emotionally unsupported. You give your time, your attention, your care. But when you need the same in return, it feels uncertain. That loneliness can be confusing because you are not alone, yet you feel unseen. Epictetus taught, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." If you want to be someone who values fairness, someone who honors mutual effort, then your actions must reflect that standard. Accepting constant imbalance contradicts that vision. It sends a message to yourself that your energy is endless and your needs are optional. Over time, that message shapes your identity. You become the giver who never receives, the one who holds everything together, and eventually the one who feels quietly resentful. Balance is not about perfection. There will be seasons when one gives more because the other is struggling. That is natural. But those seasons shift. They do not remain fixed. If the scales are permanently tilted and nothing changes, that is not temporary imbalance. That is structure. And structures that rely on one-sided effort eventually collapse. Aristotle wrote, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." In a healthy relationship, two individuals create something stronger together than either could alone. But when one part consistently carries more, the whole does not grow stronger. It grows strained. True connection multiplies energy. It does not drain it. If you leave interactions feeling depleted more often than fulfilled, that feeling deserves attention. The central theme remains steady. Growth, dignity, and peace require balance. When you are always the one adjusting, you slowly adjust yourself out of alignment. When you are always apologizing, you begin questioning your worth. And when your efforts are rarely matched, you start wondering if you are valued or simply available. Balance requires honesty. Honest reflection about how much you give and how much you receive. Honest conversations about expectations. Honest boundaries when patterns repeat. If those conversations are dismissed or deflected, the imbalance will not correct itself. It will continue quietly until you reach a breaking point. Love thrives in mutual respect and shared effort. It breathes in reciprocity. It grows in fairness. If that fairness is absent and your endurance becomes the foundation of the relationship, you are not preserving connection. You are sustaining imbalance. And imbalance, left unaddressed, slowly erodes the very bond you are trying to protect. Some signs are not subtle. They do not whisper. They do not hide behind confusion or mixed signals. They are clear. Abuse, whether physical, emotional, verbal, or psychological, is not complicated. It is disqualifying. There is no deep philosophical debate required. There is no need to overanalyze patterns or reinterpret intentions. Harm that repeats and leaves you fearful, diminished, or controlled is not something to negotiate with. It is something to recognize for what it is. Abuse does not always begin loudly. Sometimes it starts with sharp words delivered in anger. Then apologies follow. Then it happens again. Emotional abuse can be even quieter. Constant criticism disguised as honesty. Insults framed as jokes. Isolation that feels like protection. Gaslighting that makes you doubt your own memory. Over time, your confidence erodes. You begin questioning your perception of events. You apologize for things you did not do. You shrink to avoid triggering another episode. That shrinking becomes survival. Dignity is not a reward someone grants you. It is an inherent right. You deserve safety. You deserve respect. You deserve to exist without fear of humiliation or harm. When someone repeatedly violates that safety and then justifies it, the issue is not misunderstanding. It is disregard. And disregard that continues after confrontation is not confusion. It is choice. You may feel torn. You may remember the good times. You may feel guilt for considering distance. But harm cannot be balanced by occasional kindness. Moments of affection do not cancel repeated injury. Abuse thrives in cycles. There is tension. There is explosion. There is apology. There is calm. And then the pattern repeats. Each cycle makes it harder to leave because you cling to the calm as proof that things are improving. But improvement requires consistent change, not temporary remorse. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Living in an abusive environment colors your inner world. Fear stains your confidence. Doubt stains your clarity. Shame stains your sense of worth. Over time, you start believing the distorted messages directed at you. You may begin to think you are too sensitive, too flawed, too difficult. That internal shift is one of the deepest injuries. Abuse does not only harm externally, it reshapes how you see yourself. Strength in these situations is often misunderstood. People praise endurance. They admire resilience. They say you are strong for staying. But strength is not about absorbing endless damage. Strength is about protecting what is sacred within you. It is about acknowledging that staying in chaos is not courage. It is fear disguised as loyalty. Real courage is choosing yourself when doing so feels terrifying. Carl Jung observed, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Abuse tries to define you by what you endure. It tries to shape your identity around survival, but your future is not determined by someone else's behavior. It is shaped by your decisions. Choosing to leave does not mean you failed. It means you refuse to let harm define your path. That decision can feel overwhelming. It may require support. It may require planning, but it begins with clarity. Abuse often isolates. You may withdraw from friends. You may hide the truth out of shame. You may protect the person who hurts you because you do not want others to see the reality. That isolation deepens the trap. It narrows your world until the harmful dynamic feels normal. Breaking that isolation is one of the first acts of reclaiming control. Speaking honestly about what is happening breaks the illusion that you must handle it alone. Epictetus taught, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." This principle does not excuse abuse. It highlights your power in response. You cannot control another person's aggression, but you can control your choice to remain. Recognizing that power is painful because it shifts responsibility back to you. It means admitting that staying is a decision, even if it feels constrained. And once you recognize that choice, the possibility of a different path becomes real. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the most difficult decisions a person can face. It tests your courage. It tests your resilience. But difficulty does not mean impossibility. Strength grows when you act in alignment with your well-being. Every step away from harm reinforces your dignity. Every boundary you set rebuilds your self-respect. The central theme remains steady and uncompromising here. Growth, peace, dignity and balance are not possible where harm is normalized. You cannot build stability on a foundation of fear. You cannot cultivate self-worth in an environment that consistently attacks it. No amount of philosophical reflection changes that fact. Sometimes people ask whether it is worth trying again, whether change is possible. Change is possible only when there is accountability, consistent effort, and professional support. But when harm is repeated without genuine transformation, staying does not prove loyalty. It prolongs suffering. Strength in this case is not staying strong inside chaos. It is having the courage to remove yourself from it. It is trusting that safety is not too much to ask for. It is believing that dignity is not negotiable. Walking away may feel like loss. It may feel like failure. But in truth, it is an act of protection. And protection is not weakness. It is wisdom in action. Communication breakdown is another fracture point, and it is often underestimated. Not the occasional misunderstanding, not the small disagreements that happen in every relationship. Those are normal. What becomes dangerous is repeated failure. You speak clearly and calmly, yet nothing changes. You explain how something makes you feel, and the response is deflection. You ask for clarity, and the conversation circles back to your tone instead of the issue. Over time, you begin to notice a pattern. You try again. You choose better words. You soften your approach. But the result remains the same. Your words seem to disappear before they land. At first, you may blame yourself. Maybe I did not explain it well. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I chose the wrong moment. That self-examination can be healthy, but when it turns into constant self-doubt, something deeper is happening. Communication requires effort from both sides. It requires willingness. It requires presence. Without those elements, even the most thoughtful conversation cannot create understanding. You may feel like you are speaking carefully and honestly, yet you are not being met with the same intention. Epictetus taught, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Listening is more than waiting for your turn. It is an act of respect. It signals that the other person's experience matters. When someone consistently refuses to listen, when they interrupt, mock, or dismiss what you are trying to express, that refusal becomes meaningful. It is no longer about communication skills. It is about unwillingness. You cannot build understanding with someone who has already decided not to understand. Repeated breakdown changes how you show up. You may begin to hold back your concerns because you anticipate frustration. You may avoid topics that matter deeply to you because discussing them feels pointless. Slowly, the relationship loses depth. Conversations stay on the surface. Real feelings remain unspoken, and what remains unspoken begins to create distance. You might still share space, share routines, share memories, but the emotional connection starts to thin. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." That insight reminds us that inner peace does not depend entirely on others, but relationships are not lived in isolation. When communication repeatedly fails, your inner world feels less steady. You start questioning whether your needs are unreasonable. You begin wondering if you are asking for too much. That internal questioning can weaken your clarity. Communication is not just about words, it is about accountability. When concerns are raised, are they acknowledged? When hurt is expressed, is there effort to repair? Or does the conversation always shift away from responsibility? If every attempt to address a problem ends in silence, blame, or dismissal, the pattern becomes clear. It is not that the message is unclear, it is that the message is unwanted. Carl Jung observed, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Communication breakdown does offer an opportunity for reflection. It invites you to consider your own reactions, your own tone, your own expectations. But reflection should lead to growth on both sides. If only one person reflects while the other resists, imbalance forms. Self-awareness cannot compensate for another person's refusal to engage honestly. Over time, repeated breakdown creates emotional fatigue. You feel tired before conversations even begin. You anticipate misunderstanding. You prepare explanations in advance. And still, nothing shifts. That fatigue builds quietly. It does not explode into dramatic conflict. It settles into resignation. You begin accepting that certain things will never be understood, that certain feelings will never be validated, that certain boundaries will never be respected. At some point, a difficult realization emerges. You are not struggling with communication, you are struggling with willingness. The other person may hear your words, but they are not listening. They may respond, but they are not engaging. And that difference changes everything. Communication thrives on mutual effort. Without it, dialogue turns into monologue. Seneca wrote, "We learn not in the school, but in life." Relationships are part of that learning. They reveal whether mutual growth is possible. If repeated attempts at honest conversation are met with resistance, it may signal that growth together is limited. Staying in that cycle requires constant emotional labor. You must carry both your feelings and the frustration of not being heard. This brings us back to the core theme quietly woven through each reflection. Growth, dignity, peace, balance, truth, values, safety, and respect all rely on communication. Without it, even strong foundations weaken. If you cannot express yourself without fear of dismissal, the relationship cannot deepen. It can only remain static or decline. Eventually, you must ask yourself whether you are speaking to be heard or speaking into a void. That question is not meant to create anger, it is meant to create clarity. If your voice consistently meets emptiness, you must consider what that emptiness represents. Continuing to speak without being heard slowly teaches you that your voice carries little weight. And once that belief takes root, self-worth begins to erode. Communication is not optional for a healthy connection, it is structural. When it breaks repeatedly and repair never comes, the fracture widens. You can continue trying, but effort alone cannot sustain a dialogue that only one person values. Recognizing that reality is not defeat, it is awareness. And awareness, even when painful, brings you closer to decisions that honor your growth and your peace. And finally, tranquility. The Stoics placed inner calm above popularity, above attachment, above approval. Not because they were cold, but because they understood something simple and powerful. Without inner stability, nothing else holds. You can have affection, history, shared memories, even deep love. But if your peace disappears in someone's presence, that absence matters. Notice the contrast. If you feel anxious before seeing them and strangely relieved when you leave, that emotional swing is not random. Your body is telling you something your mind may still be debating. Tranquility does not mean a life without disagreement. It does not mean silence or constant agreement. It means steadiness. It means you can be yourself without fear of eruption. It means you do not walk on eggshells. It means your nervous system is not bracing for impact. When that steadiness is missing consistently, something fundamental is off. You may try to convince yourself that all relationships are hard, that tension is normal, that love requires endurance, and to some extent, growth always carries friction. But there is a difference between productive discomfort and chronic disturbance. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That examination does not stop at your career or your goals. It includes your relationships. It includes the emotional atmosphere you live in daily. You are not asked to judge harshly or react impulsively. You are invited to observe honestly. Do you feel clearer after spending time with them, or more confused? Do you feel stronger or subtly diminished? Do you feel inspired to expand or pressured to contract? These reflections are not dramatic. They are quiet assessments of your internal state. If you are constantly exposed to criticism, tension, or unpredictability, your inner dialogue shifts. You may begin doubting your instincts. You may overthink simple decisions. You may lose confidence in your own judgment. Tranquility allows you to think clearly. Without it, your thinking becomes reactive. Sometimes we cling to relationships because of history, years invested, shared experiences, family ties, blood. The weight of what has already been built can feel impossible to walk away from. You may feel that ending such a connection would mean wasting time or betraying loyalty, but time invested does not justify continued erosion. A long history does not cancel present harm. Staying solely because of history ignores the future you are still shaping. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Looking into your heart requires silence and courage. It means noticing not just what you say publicly, but what you feel privately. When you imagine your life continuing exactly as it is, does your chest feel lighter or heavier? That reaction is information. It reflects whether your spirit feels nourished or drained. Tranquility is not dramatic excitement. It is the quiet sense that you are aligned with yourself. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future." If your peace depends on someone eventually changing, eventually understanding, eventually becoming different, then your tranquility is fragile. You are waiting for a future version of the relationship to grant you calm. But calm that relies on future change is not stable. It keeps you suspended between hope and anxiety. Epictetus taught, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." You cannot control another person's behavior, tone, or emotional maturity. You can only control your response. Recognizing that truth can be liberating and painful at the same time. It means accepting that if the dynamic continues unchanged, the responsibility for remaining lies partly with you. That acceptance is not blame. It is empowerment. It restores your agency. Tranquility requires boundaries. It requires courage to say that your peace matters, and sometimes that courage leads to distance. Ending a relationship is never easy. It can feel like tearing apart something familiar, especially when family is involved, especially when shared memories are deep. There is grief in that decision. There is uncertainty. There may be misunderstanding from others, but staying in a dynamic that erodes your spirit is not noble. It is slow self-destruction disguised as loyalty. Aristotle observed, "Happiness depends upon ourselves." That statement does not dismiss the value of connection. It highlights responsibility. Your well-being is not a luxury, it is your foundation. When you consistently sacrifice that foundation to preserve a bond, you weaken yourself, and a weakened self cannot contribute meaningfully to any relationship. The central thread running through all of this remains steady. Growth, emotional safety, autonomy, respect, truth, values, balance, protection from harm, communication, and finally tranquility. Each one points toward alignment. Alignment between who you are and the environment you choose to remain in. When that alignment breaks repeatedly, the signs accumulate. They do not shout, they build. Ending a relationship does not mean you are cruel. It does not mean you are impatient. It means you have examined your life honestly. It means you have weighed the cost of staying against the possibility of peace. It means you have chosen clarity over confusion. In the end, the question is not whether leaving will hurt. It often will. The question is whether staying will continue to erode you. If your inner calm has become a rare visitor instead of a steady companion, that absence deserves your attention. Tranquility is not selfish. It is essential, and protecting it may be one of the most courageous decisions you ever make. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to fight harder, not to explain more, not to endure longer, but to walk away with your dignity intact. You are not here to shrink for comfort. You are here to grow in alignment with your values, your peace, and your truth. And every decision you make either strengthens that alignment or weakens it. If something in this conversation stirred you, don't ignore it, follow it. On your screen, there's another video that goes even deeper into protecting your peace and mastering your inner world. Watch it next and keep building the strength that comes from clarity. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal.